Hey guys, welcome to the second video in the basic series. Today, we're going to be editing some shapefiles. Let's get into it. So the first thing you're going to want to do to edit shapefiles is actually make a shapefile. So I've got a polygon and a line shapefile created, but let's just go through the process and add in a point shapefile. So first off, just to clear things up, a shapefile is just a vector file. It stores geographic information and data, and it is the foundation for building maps and data in GIS. In ArcGIS Pro, they're actually called feature classes. A feature class is a shapefile, but not all shapefiles are feature classes. A little confusing, but let's go ahead and just make a feature class. To make a feature class, head down to your project folder in the catalog. Under your project folder, you're going to have something called a geodatabase. It'll be your project name.gdb. We're going to right click on that, go to new, and put in a new feature class. Fill out the name and pick the feature class type. This feature class I want to call basics point so that I know exactly what it's for, but it's just going to show up as point as my alias in my contents window. I want it to be a point type feature. If I go to the next page, I can add in fields, but we can do this later on. You can choose the spatial reference, but by default, it'll be the same as your project. Then there's some other attributes that you can adjust if necessary. Click finish when done. Now I have my base maps and my polygon, line, and point feature classes. If you want to clean things up a little bit, you can always group them together. So if you select your feature classes, you can right click and go group. That'll put them into a group. If I head over to the create features tab, I can now create a polygon, a point, and a line. If you don't have the create features tab open, head over to the edit ribbon and select create. Let's begin drawing some shapes. Let's start off with the polygon. So if you just want to map out a wetland, you can go ahead and just click along, select points. And when you're done, just double click and it'll finish up the shape. Now I kind of messed up here, and that leads me to my first couple tools. Let's start with edit vertices. Edit vertices allows you to move vertices, but also add vertices using the plus. And if you add a vertice that you don't really want, you can always delete it. When you're done with your changes, you can hit the check mark and it'll say your changes. The next tool I want to talk about is reshape. Reshape works very similar to creating a new feature, except it just modifies your previous feature. For example, if you start inside of your polygon and go outside of it and end up back inside, it'll reshape it to the points you had. To bring it back in, you can start outside of the polygon and then follow the shape and end back outside, and it'll reshape. I'm going to use reshape to add in this wetland. Let's say I want these wetlands to be separate. I can use the split tool. By intersecting the polygon completely, you can split it into two features. I can now delete this part if I want to keep them completely separate. Let's say I want to reconnect them. I have to reselect a wetland that I want to reshape, use reshape, and then I can draw to make them connect. To make it a little easier, there are additional tools. If you start inside the wetland, and then you can use the trace tool, you can trace the edge of the wetland, and then bring it back inside of the wetland. Now, if I want to bring these two shapes back together, I can select both and select merge. When you select merge, it'll open up a new window. You get to select which feature gets to keep its properties. Right now, we don't really have it, but we can just merge them, and now our two wetlands will be one. You can also use the move tool to move the entire shapefile. You can rotate, you can scale, to make all sorts of changes to the shape. Let's create a new polygon for this wetland. I'm going to try using a different tool. I want to use the freehand. And let's say I also want to capture the grassed area around the wetland. Now, if you want this shapefile to be only the grassed area, what you can do is you can use continue feature. Continue feature will allow you to draw inside and it'll take out that area. Let's use the streaming tool to freehand it once again. Now, when I click on this area, it'll select it. But when I click inside of it, it'll deselect it because it actually is no longer present in this area. This is now a donut shape. Let's create a new polygon inside of this wetland for the actual wetland area. You can use the trace tool in create features, select, and just trace around the wetland and double click when done. you will now have one shape for the wetland and one shape for the area on the outside. Now that our shapes might have two definitions, we might want to begin adding attributes. To add attributes, right-click on the feature class and go to the attribute table. Right now, our feature class only has an ID, the shape length, and the shape area. If we want to add more attributes, we first have to save our changes, and then we can add fields. To add a new field, such as land type, you can just head down to the bottom and type in what you want it to be. The field name cannot have spaces, but the alias, the thing that you'll see, can. You can change the data type, so right now, along as a number, I want it to be a text. You can select how many characters it can be up to. Currently, it is at 255. And if you want to add in another field, such as area, you can click here to add a new field. Let's call this one acres. If you leave the alias blank, it'll autofill as the field name. You can select the number type. I typically go for float. This will meet most of your needs. But you could also select something like date, and you can change the number format if you desire. You can change the number of decimal places, significant digits, and do a bunch of other things if necessary. If you want to get into drop downs, that's under domains, but that's pretty in-depth, so let's get into that in a later video. Right now, I'm happy with my amount of fields, so I'm going to save, and now I can exit fields. My polygon now has land type and acres. If I want to write in the land type, I can do so. To know which polygon is which, you can select, and then it'll highlight it. This one will be wetland vegetation. And the inside can be the wetland. If I want to automatically calculate acres, I can right-click on acres and use calculate geometry. Let's save any pending edits. You also want to deselect if you want to calculate the geometry for every single polygon. To deselect, click clear. So for our attribute acres, I want to calculate area, and I want the aerial unit to be acres. You can select the coordinate system, and if your map's set up with your coordinate system, you can just use the current map. Let's hit OK. We now have the acres calculated. One thing to note is that if you change the size, it won't automatically change the acres. Before you use any of the data, always be sure to recalculate the geometry. This way you will always have the right amount for your shapefile. Another tool you might want to use is the clip tool. Let's say I don't want any shapefile to overlap with this one. I can use the clip tool, use discard, and clip all editable features. And if I use clip, it will clip the feature so that it is no longer there. Another common tool is buffer. Let's say I want to create a buffer area around this wetland. You can use buffer. You can select the template style of the new shape that's created with the buffer. Let's create a buffer distance of 50 meters. You can select the number of rings, so how many times it goes out that 50 meters. You can have it so it shows a preview. And then you can run buffer. Let's move on to creating lines. Creating lines can be very similar. By default, you will just draw in points. Most of the tools work in a very similar way. There are a couple of cool new tools. First off, let's head over to Fillet. Fillet allows you to make really nice curves. Simply select two sections of a line, and then you can drag in and out depending on how you want the curve to look. Another nice tool is the extend or trim feature. You can select the thing that you want to extend or trim, and then move your cursor over to another line. It'll extend it until it is touching that line. It also works as a trim tool, where if it's past it, it can trim it to that line. Copy parallel is another nice tool that allows you to copy the line and make a parallel line based off of what you add in. This line heads south, so if I select right, I can make copies to the right of it. If I want to make a quarter section grid, this becomes quite handy as I can enter the approximate distance and repeat it many, many times. Hit copy to copy parallel. Creating points is a little bit more basic. Generally, you're just going to pick a spot where you want that point to go. You can also have it so that it only creates points along the line, and you can select how you want the points to show up. I now have a point at the beginning and the end of the line. One more thing I should talk about is snapping. With snapping on, your cursor will snap to other features. You can choose what parts it'll snap to, such as if you want it to snap to the nearest start or end point. If you turn off snapping, it'll no longer snap. But the easier thing to do, instead of selecting this, is simply to hold space. So if snapping is on, it will snap, but if I hold space, it no longer will snap. Just a reminder that a lot of these tools do require you to have a selection in order for them to work. To select, simply use the tool. My preference is the rectangle. You can just drag it over a feature to select. If you want to add more to your selection, you can hold Shift to add more. If you want to remove things from your selection, hold Control. If you want to clear, simply hit Clear. Using these tools, you can really map out your landscape. Start practicing, and let's move on to our next video.